Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals, I'm back, but there's going to be a little different format today. I will answer some questions relative to what a listener wanted to have me answer. So we're going to do that first, and then I'll get into what I usually do, which is my choice.
Today's questions are brought to us by Catherine Fleming Bruce, a journalist from South Carolina. She is the CEO of Camelot Excalibur Trust Ltd. And the founder of Collaboration for Community Trust. Catherine's questions are centered around the topic of the need for more Black, Indigenous people of color in our United States Senate. Our first question: what led you to consider electoral politics as a way to make social change in your community?
I did run for U.S. Senate one time, but before that, I decided to run for the legislature when I was, at that time, a very young man, because I'd always been involved in the issues confronting our community: segregated schools, lack of employment, housing that was restricted. But there was a senator in the legislature named Edward Danner. He was a union man. He had worked at the packing house. He was doing a very good job, but unfortunately he died. And a Republican appointed another guy whose name was Althouse. We called him Outhouse because he was such a Tom. He had stood on the floor of the legislature and said, if God intended that the white man be in charge, there's nothing we can do but follow along and do what he says. I was so outraged that although I had never thought of running for the legislature, I put my name on the ballot, and as fate would have it, I won. So it was the thing that drove me into politics was the absence of a strong voice at any level, state, local, or county, that spoke for us and the problems that we had.
Our next question: what issues were you most concerned about that led you to run for United States Senate?
As everybody who has paid attention, even in grade school, knows, each state has 2 senators at the U.S. level, and none of them had ever addressed our issues, those of Black people. In fact, they were very racist, and openly so. The kind of issues that we needed to have addressed were what I already touched on: housing, employment, schools, segregation everywhere. There were not even Black bus drivers. There was no Black person on the fire department, and the police were almost like occupying Gestapo members. The usual things that were confronting the communities of color and Black at that time were the ones we were faced with also.
For our third question: what led to your choice of political party to run as their candidate for U.S. Senate?
They had qualified as a political party, apparently. Now, party politics was something completely foreign to me. And since they could have a candidate and nobody wanted to be the candidate for them because they favored the rights for the LGBTQ community, although they were just all lumped together as homosexuals. I don't care what a person does with whomever that person chooses, when it's voluntary and at night and doesn't involve me. But since I was approached and asked, would I be their party representative by a young man whom I respected in the community, I said sure, and it'll give me a chance to at least comment, even though nobody is going to debate me. So it gave me a chance to have access to the media in a way that I wouldn't, and there was not even a lot of that because everybody knew there was no chance whatsoever for that party to make any impact on anything.
For our fourth question, what were some memorable moments for you as a U.S. Senate candidate?
There was only one memorable moment. People wanted to see Bob Kerrey debate Ernie Chambers. So they arranged a debate. Bob Kerrey refused to show up. So I was able to point at the empty podium and say, this is the man who is supposedly strong enough to fight for the interests of the people in this state, yet he's afraid to debate me face to face. That should give you an idea of which of us you ought to vote for. Nevertheless, Bob Kerrey won. So I never had any issues that I expected to deal with as a member of the U.S. Senate because I knew I would never be there.
For our fifth question, there have only been a handful of African Americans who have served in the U.S. Senate. What impact do you think this had on our community?
With all due respect to those black members of the U.S. Senate who did the very best they could, they had about as much impact on the interests of black people in our communities as a tick would have on the back of an elephant.
For our next question, what are your suggestions for mobilizing and organizing to increase the number of African Americans in the U.S. Senate?
It is very simple. There's no magic, no mysticism. We have to get enough people to vote for a black candidate. The black people are going to register Democrat. In Nebraska, there has always been an overwhelming number of Republicans, I refer to them as Republicans, vis-a-vis Democrats. So there's no way a Democrat will ever be a U.S. Senator from Nebraska, in my opinion. So that question has no relevancy in the real world.
For our last question, should this topic be centered mostly around policy and not so much about identity or representation?
That's like asking a mouse who's being pursued by a cat, and he's going to run into a corner, and there are mice and rat traps in that corner. Whatever the policy questions are, in a state like Nebraska, we are not going to be able to elect somebody of our choice. So we could wish and hope and pray all that we choose, but we're not going to have any significant impact. Whatever impact we're going to have will be at the local level. So I guess like that lady said, wishing and hoping and singing and praying. And after you do all of that, it's going to have done no good.
We would like to thank our viewer, Catherine Fleming Bruce, for her questions today regarding Senator Chambers running for U.S. Senate in 1988 as a New Alliance Party candidate. If you are a viewer with questions for Senator Chambers, you can email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com.
Brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals. As Fats Domino say, yes, it's me, and I'm here again. I'm paraphrasing. There are a few things that I want to really get into, and this is going to be a program which is a little different approach for me. I'm going to talk about some things not necessarily that are current in terms of today, tomorrow, and yesterday, except that I want to touch on the fact, I call it a fact, that Kamala Harris is the next president of the United States. And that woman is qualified more than anybody who has been president during my lifetime. She served as a federal prosecutor. She was the Attorney General of California. And when Trump wanted to make comments about, is she not qualified to do this and she's not qualified to do that, she had made a comment that she knows very well how to deal with convicted felons, which Trump is right now. So he wants to debate. He claims, bring it on, bring it on. And I think he is terrified of that woman. I don't know if a man wears what they call depends, which is heavily padded undergarments, but I think that's what Trump is going to wear to that debate so that what he does in his britches will not show up on camera. Now I'm going to get into what I intend to talk about today, a number of things. This is a letter. It's dated 5 November 1959. That's the way the military writes a date. This is the heading, Company D, 1st Battalion Group, 1st Brigade, RFA Training, in parentheses, Fort Ord, California. Subject, Private Ernest W. Chambers. How many of you all know I was in the Army? It doesn't matter. 2, the commanding officer, Company E, 2nd Battalion, 355th Infantry Regiment. On September 15, 1959, Private Ernest W. Chambers joined this company to complete his second 8 weeks of infantry training. From the first day of training, he has proven himself to be an outstanding soldier. This soldier has constantly demonstrated outstanding character. He has demonstrated a willingness to learn and get the job done, which is in keeping with the highest standards of the military service. During his second 8 weeks of infantry training, this company has been extremely fortunate to be able to have a soldier of Private Chambers' caliber, and as graduation time comes along, we are indeed sorry to see this young man leave, but at the same time, very happy to have had him with us. It is a well-known fact in this company that when Private Chambers does something, he gives 100% of his mental and physical energies. This attitude toward military life is indeed most commendable. I highly recommend promotion for this soldier. I would do it myself, but regulations prohibit it. Respectfully yours, Marshall D. Burdick, Captain, Infantry Commanding. That letter was dated November 5th, 1959. This you cannot read, but you can see that it is a formal document. It says, Official Records, Department of Defense, United States of America. Honorable discharge from the Armed Forces of the United States of America. This, they write in cursive, which is very difficult to read. This is to certify that PFC E3 Ernest Chambers Ernest W. BR 17499-941 was honorably discharged from the Army of the United States on the 12th day of July, 1963. This certificate is awarded as a testimonial of honest and faithful service. Jack T. Young, Colonel. So I served in the Army. I'm coming home, I did my time. I served honorably. I received a letter of commendation and an honorable discharge. But those are not the kind of things that I mentioned. I did not do anything heroic. I did not shoot at anybody. Nobody shot at me. It was an unpleasant duty that I had to undertake. I wanted to get it out of the way so I wouldn't face the draft while I was in the middle of trying to go to law school. Maybe I wouldn't have been drafted, but at any rate, I wanted to do this. I've never been to another country. The only time I was outside of the physical boundaries of the United States, and I say physical because I did, when I left Fort Ord, we left from Los Angeles, and that airplane had to fly out over the ocean a little ways to make a very wide turn to come back. So the short distance that that airplane flew over the ocean was the only time that I physically was outside the physical boundaries, earth boundaries of the United States. Y'all didn't know I was in the Army, did you? Let me tell you something else I did. I voluntarily carried the flamethrower when we were on these marches, and you do a lot of make-believe. They try to make what you're doing as realistic as possible in terms of what you'll meet. So the flamethrower is a tank filled with jellied gasoline. It weighs about 69 pounds. It has a flexible cord or tube or hose, and on the end, something like a pistol grip and a trigger. And when you fire that device, you have to put your front foot forward to brace yourself and then lean your whole body forward, because when you pull that trigger and the air forces that jelly gasoline out and you pull another trigger and it ignites the gasoline as it goes, you will be knocked off your feet if you don't brace yourself. Some guys, after being told time and again, the Army never has you do something without drilling it into your head. But some people had heads impervious to reason. So they take the flamethrower. Unfortunately, we never used it with the jelly gasoline and set it afire. We used it with water. Up it would go and back they would fall, and everybody would roar with laughter, which showed the general level of intelligence of the people who were going into the Army at that time. But nevertheless, when we would go on long marches, I would carry the flamethrower. That impressed the people there, because there was very little that people in the Army volunteered for. My mind was active. I would get bored quickly. I had to have something to occupy my mind. So I carried the flamethrower. Another thing that I did, Fort Ord is kind of on the border of a desert, they were told us, because at night the temperature dropped low enough so that in the morning there was a thin layer or crust of ice over the water. But after a few hours, very few, all that melted and it became very hot, very humid, and difficult to endure. They would give us a canteen, we would fill it with water. They had what they call Lister bags, very large canvas bags that were suspended, and they had water with some salt in them to replenish the salt you used as you went on those long marches. But sometimes they didn't have these bags along with us. We had to learn how to, pardon the expression, husband that water that we had in our canteen, because that would be all we'd have. I was the only black person at that time in that company. There was a Latino, but I was the only black one. So when we took a break, as they had to give us, because the temperature would be in the high 90s, these white guys would be stretched out and lying down, and almost all their water would be gone. And I would take my canteen out, I'd unscrew the cap, and while they were panting, I would pour all that water out. I wouldn't drink the water. Seriously, I'm not part camel, but I knew how to condition myself for the conditions we were going to confront. They said, Chambers, you're not going to drink that water? I said, what does it look like? Don't do that. I'd like it. I said, do you have a canteen? Yeah. I said, well, put water in your canteen like I put it in mine. But I drank it. I said, that's on you. If you had done as I have done, and you had not drunk the water, you would have water to drink now. And I still don't need it, and I poured it out. And that was to let these white guys know, because I weighed about 170 pounds at that time, which was not big compared to the other people there, that they had somebody among them who may not be able to fight his way out of a wet paper bag, but he'd give it a good go. And believe it or not, brothers and sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals, nobody ever challenged me. Nobody ever, what they called me out of my name. I did everything I was supposed to do. I didn't want any problems. I wanted to get my service done so I could get out of there as quickly as possible. Meaning, no extra time tacked on because I didn't do this or didn't learn that. I even, for a young white guy, wrote a letter to his girlfriend. She had stopped writing to him, and in the barracks, he'd be all whiny. And I said, man, what's the matter with you? He told me about his girlfriend. I said, write her a letter. He said, I did, but it doesn't make any difference. I said, look, I'm going to write a letter, and what you have to do, because I think your girlfriend recognizes your writing, you copy what I wrote and send it to her. He did it. Maybe 2 weeks later, he got a package in the mail. Brownies and an envelope with a heart in it, and they had reconciled. I would help people whenever and wherever I could. Nobody was my enemy just because of what he or she may look like. That person would have to have done something to me, or somebody like me, or hurt somebody who was weak in order to make me even have a hostile thought toward them. And my attitude has always been, I'll treat you the way you treat me. But let me put it a different way so it's positive. Nobody can treat me better than I will treat them. And that has always been my credo, even when I was in the legislature. And that's why I put as my occupation in the little booklet they had for us, Defender of the Downtrodden. Now I've got some things that I'm going to read. You didn't know I was going to do that, did you? Well, you learn by watching. This article is called The Art of Politics. It was written in the Lincoln Journal ages ago, March 23rd, 2015. It's titled The Art of Politics. Longtime Nebraska lawmaker flexes second skill, sketching. Nebraska's longest-serving lawmaker drops to one knee and spreads more than 6 sheets of notepaper across the floor of his office. Senator Ernie Chambers points to pencil sketches of a man, a pig, a hairy cyclops. That's the guy, the giant with one eye in his forehead. Behind him sits a box of framed portraits created with a childhood skill. They mean the skill was learned in childhood, not childlike in the way I drew. He has quietly honed during a 40-year legislative career. Between drawn-out committee hearings and floor debates, Chambers has built a sketch art portfolio featuring everyone from Malcolm X to Governor Pete Ricketts. And I happen to have to show you, you can't see it because it's not that large, but I drew more than one picture of Malcolm X. This is one that I drew that the Nebraska Humanities magazine publishers, which was the Nebraska Historical Society, saw and asked me, could they use it on their cover? And I said they certainly could. And what they say on the cover, as an intro to what's in the magazine, inside, autumn activities, literature and Indian culture, Malcolm X, the Lincoln Highway, travels with Cather, and more. By the way, Willa Cather, one of America's best writers, and certainly the best writer from Nebraska, who has a statue now in the Hall of Statues in the State Capitol building, the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C., was a lesbian. Willa Cather, y'all didn't know that, did you? Lots you don't know. Then here's what they put below the picture of Malcolm X that I drew. And this picture was just to get the essence of Malcolm. His expression, the penetrating stare, the intelligent look that he had. On the cover, Portrait of Malcolm X by Ernest Chambers. This drawing was done shortly after Malcolm's assassination in 1965. The Nebraska Historical Society would like to thank Senator Chambers for sharing his personal artwork with our readers. I did a lot of things. They didn't know I could draw. There are things that I do that people don't know, but I don't tell everything I know as soon as I learn it. Going back to this article, talking about my drawing. It's therapeutic, said Chambers, 77. I can say now, a young, spry 77. I watch the pencil and things just flow out of it. Words that rhyme and pictures that shade themselves. Sometimes I'm not even concentrating on making a picture. I'm just putting lines on a sheet of paper, unquote. His fellow lawmakers have taken notice and even asked for copies of some of the work. Chambers of Omaha served 38 years in the Nebraska's one-house legislature before voters enacted term limits that forced him from office. The self-described, quote, defender of the downtrodden, unquote, was elected again in 2012 after sitting out the minimum time required. He is legendary for his repeated attempts to abolish the death penalty, his knack for derailing legislation he opposes, and the sweatshirts and jeans he wears at the Capitol and others suits and amid other suits and ties. In 2007, the left-leaning independent sued God to make a point about frivolous lawsuits. That's not completely correct. The Constitution of Nebraska said that the doors of the courthouse would be open to every man for grievances in terms of his person, his property, and so forth. That's a way of saying that anybody who has a grievance can get into the courthouse. I wanted to show that even a lawsuit against God could be processed as a lawsuit, and it was. And I lost at the lower level. But I lost because the judge said I did not serve the defendant. And furthermore, the defendant can never be served, so this lawsuit is dismissed. I filed an appeal because the Constitution says and court rules that if a lawsuit is dismissed in that fashion because it does not meet the standards of being filed or there was not service, there is nothing that the court can say as far as the merits or the facts of the case. Since this judge had gone further to say that there could never be service, he went beyond merely dismissing it because of a failure to dismiss. So when I filed it to the Supreme Court, they had to accept my appeal. They had to process it. But they also dismissed it, saying that the court does not deal with theoretical questions. So what I could have done was filed it all over again, since what the lower court did was reversed because that judge said more than he should have said. I know what the law is. I follow the law. They don't. But if I'm going to go into your territory and fight you, I want to know as much about you as I can. When I went to Creighton, I was working at the post office. I would work all night sometimes. I'd come up to the law school. In the basement, they had a lounge and a big leather chair where you could stretch out, and I would sleep. I didn't go to class. In fact, I missed the majority of my classes, but they did not have a policy of cutting you out because you missed too many classes. That came into effect because I missed so many classes. But after missing far more than half my classes, guess what happened when we took our final exams? I came out number 4 on the dean's academic list, and the white students were furious. So from then on, they wanted to make sure that I attended class, and if I didn't, then the consequence would be me being cut from a class. So I studied where I am and what the rules are that we will be governed by. If you were in a classroom and the professor called on you and you didn't know the answer, you were excused from that class, I guess to humiliate you and to tell you, go study and know the answer next time. So when they would ask a question, I would kind of fidget and look like I didn't know what was going on, and they would ask me, Senator, I was a senator then, Mr. Chambers. And I'd say, yes. They would ask the question, I'd say, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. And he said, you know protocol? I'd say, yes, I do. Well, my book was already closed. I walked out, down to the lounge and went to sleep, and I was not marked absent because I had at least come into the classroom. One time we were looking out the window, and I was wearing khakis then, combat boots, and a white t-shirt, and this guy said, "Why don't you dress more appropriately for law school?" I said, "Maybe if you would worry less about how I dress and pay more attention to your lessons, you would be on the dean's list just like I was." Because I was number 4 on the dean's list, a large group of them below me could not get on. If I had not been there, about 6 more would have been on the list, but I was a convenient cutoff place because between me, there was not much of a gap between me and the other 3. There was a larger gap between me and the ones below me. Had I not been there, all of those would have been on the dean's list, so they began to grumble and mumble about me not attending classes. Well, as we progressed through law school, everybody knew the courses would get more difficult, and of course, if I didn't go to school, attend classes, I couldn't answer the questions on the exam. But here's what I knew. If I read those books, any question that was posed, I would be able to answer it. I read English. I understand English when I read it. I read the law books. I read the cases. I understood them. When we were taking our exams, they're in what they call blue books, all paper, but it had a blue cover. I would write my answers quickly and leave. For always the first one to leave, and they were sure I'd flunked. I would always get a high grade. So then they decided to enforce an attendance rule. They didn't put me out of school for being absent too much. They refused to let me register. And I said, "I think that is absolutely wrong. Why will you not let me register?" The dean said, "Because you missed so many classes." I said, "Well, here's what you ought to have done. You should have followed the principles of the law and justice. And soon as I reached the point where I'd missed too many classes, you should have told me that I was out of the class. But you should not have let me take the exams. But you, like everybody else, thought I would flunk, didn't you? So you think now the only way to get me is to head me off at the pass. Well, if you don't let me register, I'm going to make all the noise I can because I never flunked the class while I was at this law school." So they let me back in. I continued to miss classes. I continued to pass all my exams, but then they put a rule in place that if you didn't attend a certain number of classes, you'd be considered to have dropped out and you couldn't go forward. And that's how they were able to keep me from finishing after 2 years. Never flunked a class, never flunked an exam. How did I get out then? Well, a new dean came from Catholic University. I was cutting hair and these white boys came down, and I remember one's name. It was Kingston Cole, and it made me think of Nat King Cole. That's the only reason I remember his name. He said, "Ernie," the dean said, because he said, "Well, your name is like a legend up there. Everybody knows who Ernie Chambers was." I said, "Oh, they do?" He said, "Oh, yes." And the dean wanted to know about who this Ernie Chambers was, and he told us that they had a file on you this thick, and there were about 8 inches between the hand at the bottom and the one on top. He said, and the dean said, he didn't see anything in all of that paper that would justify them from not letting me finish. I didn't flunk out. I didn't flunk a class. I didn't flunk an exam. The only way they stopped me was by not letting me register. He told us to tell you that if you would come back, you wouldn't have to pay a penny in tuition. You could get any books on any subject you wanted from the bookstore and not pay a penny. You won't have to attend classes, but you'll have to pass your exams. I said, that's what I wanted to do anyway, and that's what I was doing. He let me back in. I took the courses. I didn't attend classes. I passed all of my exams. I passed all of my courses, and I was given my degree. I didn't attend a graduation ceremony, but I have a law degree, a doctor of laws if you go up and look on the wall of Creighton in that law school, they have a picture of everybody who graduated. No picture of me. I'm an embarrassment to them. They wish I had never been. Here's something else that happened that was insulting. Then the new dean, not the one who let me come back, he left, and another dean guy came taking over, and he called me up to talk. He said, Senator Chambers, not Senator, Mr. Chambers, I have to talk to you. I said, why? He said, you're accused of cheating. I said, cheating? I don't cheat. What? I was speechless. What class did I cheat in? He said, well, Professor Green's course. I said, Pat Green? I said, we were students together. How could I cheat in his course on the exam when it was an open book test? We could bring our book and we could bring notes and whatever else we had. He said, oh, I know you didn't cheat. And then when I talked to Professor Green, he said you couldn't cheat on his class because if you didn't know the answer, you couldn't find it in the book quickly enough, even though you had the book, to answer the questions. I said, well, now, if he told you there was no way for me to cheat, why do you insult me by bringing me up here like this and saying I was accused? This is the way white people are. He said, well, whenever an accusation like that is made, we have to take it up with the person who was accused. I said, that is insulting, and I walked out. I had a bad experience. I had bad experiences with white people all the way. But here's the thing that I learned early on. Learn their rules and beat them at their own game. They hate that I have a law degree from Creighton. They hate that I have an undergraduate degree from Creighton. But in undergraduate school, they didn't care whether I came to class or not. And in fact, I think they preferred it because I would ask questions that the professor could not answer. I was even allowed to sleep in one professor's English class, and I was not every closed eye asleep. So I heard him say, Ernst, he called me Ernst, Ernst knows more asleep than the rest of you all know awake. Wake him up. So I played like I was thinking the guy woke me up. I said, uh-huh. He said, Ernst, we're reading about this play that Hawthorne wrote. It's about the great stone face. What was the name of the person whose great stone face was there? And I gave it. And the professor said, see what I told you? And that's the way it went with me in school. No white person's material was too hard for me to master. If white kids could learn it, I knew it was duck soup for me. But let me go back to what I was doing. I got distracted. Oh. Chambers said he doodles in committee hearings to fight boredom when familiar issues arise. In the first 45 days of this year's session, he scrawled more than 60 images on sheets the size of a notepad. Chambers tends to draw in committee hearings when the side he favors is testifying, said Senator Adam Moorfield of Lincoln, who serves with him on the Judiciary Committee. When his adversaries speak, Chambers puts down the pen and peppers them with questions. Moorfield said he was amazed by the quality of art which Chambers sometimes combines with poetry and distributes to lawmakers. Quote, I've thought about asking him for one or two, Moorfield said. I call them Ernie Grams. Senator Bob Christ of Omaha noticed Chambers pencil sketching a human eye earlier this year. He sits next to me in the Judiciary Committee at that time. The picture had such depth that Christ asked for a copy to show his wife, a professional oil painter. He captions his drawings with random thoughts beneath his cyclops, the one-eyed giant. Chambers wrote, man, oh man, I can't wait for evolution to kick in. Things can only get better. And I had one that said, I drew this picture, and it said, if God was a peanut, would he be afraid of a monkey? Continuing, when Omaha attorney Dave Domina spoke this month in a hearing related to the Keystone XL pipeline, he wasn't just testifying, he was unknowingly posing for a portrait. As Domina argued for tougher regulations on oil pipelines, a bill Chambers introduced, Chambers' pen gave shape to a slender face, suit, and glasses. I did a portrait of him. He's a great multitasker, Christ said. He sits there and draws, but he's always listening to every word of the arguments. Chambers said he started drawing in high school art classes and continued through law school. A law professor noticed his work on a piece of poster board and suggested Chambers pursue a career as an artist. Quote, "In my mind, he was telling me anything he could to get me out of his law school," unquote, Chambers said. His collection features portraits of John Kennedy, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and a smiling young mother with her infant son. And I happen to have this. It might be large enough for you to see. This is the one that they were talking about. Just one of the pictures. His 2001 rendition of Elvis Presley was so detailed that Capitol staffer framed it and hung it in her office. I'm gonna see something. The Boy Scout motto, "Be prepared." Here was the sketch of Elvis Presley. And again, you probably can't make it out very well. But this lady really liked him. I couldn't understand why she liked him so much, but she wanted a picture of him. She didn't know I could draw. And here's what I put on the picture. To Julia, the task of an artist is to transform the mundane into art. The only reason this means anything to me is because it means something to you, talking about the Elvis drawing. If not for that, I would never have drawn this picture. It is for you, it is yours. Ernie Chambers, January 2001. They call him the king of rock and roll. They're out of their mind. But anyway, that was one of the things that the reporter thought enough about to mention in his article. His collection, features John F. Kennedy, Jacqueline Onassis, the infant and his mother, which I showed you. The Elvis Presley was so detailed that a Capitol staffer framed it and hung it in her office. Other sketches are more political or function as social commentary, such as Joe Camel with a skull and a pack of cigarettes. This one was too large for me to bring here. His collection. Despite the praise, Chambers insists he's not an artist but a drawer because he lacks formal training. "What I do is like Burger King. Have it your way," he said. "If some people see it as good art, that's what it is. If people see it as bad art, that is what it is." And like the lady said, so much for that. Actually, the song says, that's all there is to that. And I think I'm going to show you a few drawings that I made. This was one when black people started wearing afros. A man and 3 beautiful black women, 2 side views and 1 straight on. And I know you probably can't make them out very well because there's some distance between me and the camera. And this one, you might can make this out, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And there's a comment on it. And this was drawn in 2016. "To my dear young friend Eva, remember me always. Your friend, Senator Ernie Chambers, November 15th, 2016. Why would I even know this little girl? Because she heard of me, and she liked me, and she wanted her parents to let her come to my office and see me, which she did. And so I drew this picture and gave it to her parents to give to her. And she wanted to come back and pose with me in my office holding that picture. So here's this very young white girl, maybe 7 years old, with a copy of this picture I gave to her. And I did write to her, "To my dear young friend Eva, remember me always. There was an article written about me receiving a speech award from the debating class or team at the university, and they had come in 7th or 8th in the nation that year, and the writer said it is no surprise that the young people would give Senator Chambers an award. It talked about how well I spoke, used language that was beautiful and just, and the writer added, Chambers is and always has been a magnet for young people. Young people have not lived long enough, if they're what people call bad, to have been bad on their own. They didn't have a good opportunity to learn. They were not treated well as children, but they hadn't been in the world long enough for me to say that anything they did was bad. They did things that maybe they ought not to have done because it was inappropriate, but I never considered them bad. And the little children knew of me, and although people in this community, some of them don't think much of me, a lot of people in the state don't think much of me, somebody thought enough of me to put me in the 3rd grade history book of all the public schools in Nebraska. And when the little white children would be brought down and they sat in the balconies, they'd see me and they would say audibly, there he is, he's in our book. And they'd have the sergeant at arms say, shh, shh. And I would just look up and I'd smile at them. And they would smile and wave back because I acknowledged them. One time a group of kids came and I sang, I don't sing well, a few words from, I'm trying to think of what, Pink Floyd song, all we are is just another brick in the wall. But when I started, I said, this is the way children feel about school because the way they're not treated right. We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. Dark sarcasms in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Then there's a little riff by Pink Floyd. And then they say, hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. Then they say, all we are is just another brick in the wall. And those kids heard that, and I got a letter. And they asked me, would I be the speaker at their graduation class? I went out to that school, and then I got a letter back. And all of the kids in the graduating class signed it. And they said that day in the legislature, when we heard you, we knew you were the one who should be our speaker. You spoke to us, you spoke for us, and I have that letter. I document everything that I'm saying. People have no idea what I was really doing in that legislature, the impact I had on this state or on the state's children. Now, naturally, I drew a picture of Malcolm X. I couldn't draw pictures of others without drawing Malcolm. But if I'm a drawer, what kind of artist would I be if I didn't draw a picture of myself? This is a picture that I drew of myself. And as Billy Joel sang in Piano Man, when I wore a younger man's clothes, that's the way I saw myself. And as Shakespeare said in one of his plays, so much for that. Because I could draw, and it was known that I could draw, there was going to be a heavyweight championship fight. And these are the guys fighting in other fights. And they wanted an advertisement for that fight. And guess what they wanted? Who was the greatest fighter of all time? Muhammad Ali. And they wanted a picture of Ali. And a young man named Michael Carter was partly promoting, and he asked me would I draw a picture of Ali that they could put in their magazine, a national magazine, advertising that championship fight. And this is the picture that I drew. You all don't know what I can do. A lot of people don't know. Some do. But this is the picture of Muhammad Ali that I drew. And it was put in this magazine, and at the top it says, or at the bottom, portrait drawing by Nebraska State Senator Ernie Chambers. What state senators ever had a picture that he drew a portrait of somebody that wound up in a national boxing magazine where they were advertising? And the fighters, Deontay, the bronze bomber, Wilder, versus Chris the Nightmare Arreola, July 16th in Birmingham, Alabama, in the Legacy Arena. And in the middle of that magazine is my picture of Muhammad Ali. But I didn't just draw a picture of Ali like that. Ali was a man of action. So what I did was to draw a picture of Ali in one of his classic fights. I don't know if you can make this out, but it was of Ali when he put a whipping on Sonny Liston, who everybody feared. Liston could walk into a room and people would begin to shiver and shake. Well, that is a drawing that I made of Ali putting the whipping on the unbeatable Sonny Liston, whom Ali knocked out. Oh, what's that? You didn't know I could draw pictures? Well, I can. And here is one. This is more of a poster. And it shows the then Attorney General. At the top is a man in a prison cell peering out. In one corner is a skull, and off in another corner is an electric chair. And there is a rhyme that goes with it. It said, hangman's noose, electric chair, prison cell, grotesque death's head. Of one who loves such things beware. Though alive, he is morally dead. And his name was Don Stenberg. I did this poster and handed it out. Naturally, he didn't like it, but they know that I'm going to say what I've got to say. Here is something that I didn't put together, but it showed what cops do. And it was done by a national cartoonist named Oliphant. And I couldn't help but put it together. And then I put some words on it. And they're too small to go on here. Failed at everything, feeling inferior, can't get a job anywhere, hate black people, beat your wife, want to be hippies, etc. And there are 4 cops. One is saying, free at last. The second one is saying, free at last. The third one is saying, thank God Almighty. And the fourth one is saying, free at last. And you know whose words those are, don't you? I'm going to scamper right along. At any rate, Father Time has caught me. And I say now what I always say at the end. As the canary said when he discovered that the door to the cage was unlocked and swinging open, I'm out of here.
You've been watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communications production.